Welcome back. We are live from Orlando, and this is just a super treat. We all are living, breathing human beings here, and we all want to optimize the way that we function, whether it's politically, whether it's economically, whether it's socially, whether it's in our marriages or relationships, whatever it may be. And one of the world's leading experts on all this kind of stuff and way more is Dr. Richard Bandler, the co-founder of Neuro Linguistic Programming. He's an absolute genius. I first started studying under Dr. Bandler, I think about 20 years ago. I had started reading his stuff back in the early 80s. And Richard, I'm so pleased, Dr. Bandler, I'm so pleased to have you with us.
Well, it's nice to be here with you.
So let's start out with just a conversation about what is NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. You and John Grinder put this thing together back in the
Well, we started putting it together. It didn't form all at once. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not even what we set out to do. It's really a combination of starting to look at the difference between examining where things go wrong and what works in terms of human thinking. Noam Chomsky laid out a set of mathematical algorithms that describe the intuitions of native speakers of English. So that, as opposed to grammarians, which are telling you how you should talk, people who are native speaker of a language intuitively can recognize well-formed sentences. You go colorless green ideas, it's kind of well-formed but kind of not well-formed, and it mapped out what's a neurological intuition, which is a reflection of your neurology and also your learning. And when I started out, there were very talented psychotherapists, but they had no idea what they were doing. Their theories didn't make any sense, really, and most of their students would just go, oh, they're so intuitive. So I started mapping the intuitions mathematically. When I met John Grinder, he had a much better map with transformational grammar. We put together a set of things that mapped their intuitions to the point where we could predict what they were going to say, and therefore we could train and teach other people to be more systematic about what they did. And the problem was they weren't getting phenomenal results. None of them were. Psychiatrists, psychologists, everything took forever, it took a long time, and learning really doesn't. And
doesn't take a long time.
Doesn't take a long time. So I started to find people who changed things and find out what they actually did. You know, that people got fed up with being afraid of heights and overcame it, and people who, you know, everything from spelling, anything that some people could do and others do to find out, you know, is the difference neurological or is the difference how they're thinking about it? And it turns out in most cases, their ability to learn to do it well was that they didn't think about it the same way. And mapping out that sequence, you know, a simple example is, you know, you can't spell Pahonics Pahonically. It's a ludicrous system. But yet, there's, you know, all through school, every year I got a new Pahonic speller. And they show you pictures of words that are very small. I went to a spelling bee and found the person who won the spelling bee, a little 12-year-old girl, and found out she made pictures of words that were this big.
6 or 8 inches tall.
Yeah,
for radio
actually
listeners.
8 to 12 inches big.
Yeah.
And then took learning disabled kids and taught them to make big pictures and to read them forwards and backwards. And after a while, they built a machine in their head that started looking at every word and encoding a big picture of it, so that they could go back and check to make sure that it's right. And then after a while, it starts to happen unconsciously and automatically. At first, it's awkward, like I said, and then it becomes automatic. And you develop literally new cortical pathways to support it. That's what learning is. And getting people over fears, you know, for years people were shocked. And there were so many things that were being interpreted instead of described. There's a real difference between description and interpretation. And, you know, if as a psychologist goes, you know, you're avoiding things, well, that's his perception of what you're doing. But, you know, if your eyes are looking up, what are you doing? I mean, I always ask people because I find out information, and, you know, we found out accessing cues that when people looked up and to the left, typically about 85% of the population is remembering an image, as opposed to when they look up and to the right, they're constructing, making up images. And that, you know, these things are neurologically hardwired. There's neurological research where they actually had discovered this and didn't know they discovered it. And it has a great application because if you know how somebody's thinking, you can change the kinds of words and make it easier for them to understand. But also you can realize that sometimes there's ways that you're thinking about things that don't work. Like if you make big pictures of scary things, you'll be scared. Whereas if you learn to make little pictures of them, you won't be as scared. I mean, this is all very practical, pragmatic stuff. I mean, I hear people talk about NLP sometimes, and it's more complicated than I can understand, and I made it up. That, to me, stuff either works or it doesn't work. You know, there are theoretical scientists, and then there are practical scientists. You know, if you make a toaster and it makes toast, it's a toaster. And you can explain why it doesn't, but it still isn't making toast. And all of the models and things that I bought and all the things I teach people in classes are just stuff that works that I've modeled out of other people. I've worked with athletes, golfers, baseball players, football players, mathematicians, architects, everything you can think of under the sun to find people who do something well and train other people to think the way they think and do it. NLP is the study of successful thinking. We're not interested in any way in what goes wrong that gives people problems. We're only interested in solutions. And, you know, he said, he was talking about that it's a map of your brain. And it's really a map of what you can do with your brain. You may not be doing it. And that finding out how people get phobias is an archaeological dig. Finding out how people get over fears is a set of skills.
For example, somebody comes to you and they say, I've got an elevator phobia. I know a couple of people, actually, who have that.
Okay, well,
what do you think?
Well, of course, elevators are two things. One, it could be claustrophobia, or it could be a phobia of elevators. There's some people who can't get in, and some people who get in and then they're afraid. It's not the same thing. To assume that it's the same thing is just foolish, right? Because if they can go in closets and, you know, and they're afraid in elevators, most of the time they won't get into the elevator. And being old-fashioned, I just take them there and find out. Meeting me is not always the most fun at first. But once I know that, then I can find it. The question is, how are they thinking to create that much fear? Because even though it's a learned response, you still have to do the same thing to get the learning to work. And, you know, in order to memorize a word or a name, you do certain things. You have to re-engage and re-access it. So they see elevator doors. Because I've walked with people that told me they had horrible elevator phobias. And I said, well, there's an elevator just around the corner. And they become absolutely petrified. You know, at the end of this course, we're going to bring in giant snakes and huge tarantulas. And if I tell people the day ahead of time, there'll be people that will be terrified, and there's no snake and no spider. Now, how is that possible? Because they're not afraid of snakes and spiders. They're afraid of the idea of snakes and spiders. They make it gigantic. And when you ask them, you know, the spiders in their head aren't this big. They're like lobsters, and they're moving towards them. If you make big pictures of lobster-sized spiders and move them towards you, anybody could scare themselves. And if you teach them how you stop that, there are certain mental procedures by which you stop doing that automatically. You know, one of them is every time you see it, you just white it out, like a brightness knob on a TV. We found out that if people step outside of themselves and look at themselves looking at the picture and run it forwards and backwards, that somehow or other it flattens out the neurons so it doesn't run automatically. And I didn't even know that till a neurologist told me. He said, you know what that does? And I said, no. I said, I know it stops the fear. And he goes, well, he said, you know, be it ever so microscopic, the billions of neurocortical pathways you grow in a lifetime know which one to do by size. And if you flatten out that size by running things backwards, it doesn't happen automatically. You almost have to learn it again. And, you know, the first day of this seminar, I brought up somebody that had a bad memory they thought about every day, had them shrink it down to the size of a dime, flicker it black and white. What happens is the neurocortical pathway runs into a loop, but if you run it and has it go on to something that's unimportant, the fear never happens.
Well, on the first day of the seminar, another thing I thought was fascinating, we're going to hit a break here, I think, in a minute or so, but you had a guy who had basically his right hand was paralyzed, and something had happened 4 or 5 years ago, something presumably emotionally traumatic that caused him to lose his ability to write with his right hand, and he was trying to teach himself to write with his left hand. You brought him up on stage. You fixed this in less than 5 minutes. The next day, I'm sitting in a class with the guy. It was the subsequent training with Kathleen, and he just suddenly jumps up and says, I just realized I've been taking notes all day with my right hand. and he's like literally cured, and you never even asked him, what was it?
He wasn't cured because he wasn't sick.
Right, but you fixed his problem, and you never asked him, was it something to do with your mother? You know, did somebody insult you? Were you masturbating too much? You simply asked about the process, right? I mean, how, you know, so I was, you know, the whole classroom was sitting there going, holy cow, this guy's a magician.
Well, it looks magical. The reason my book was called The Structure of Magic is magic has structure. And thinking is the most magical thing of all, if you think about it. And the trouble with magic is, you know, magic can go awry as easily as it can go well. And so you have to structure it in the right way. That, you know, and especially if you think about, you know, all the post-hypnotic suggestions he'd gotten from doctors, you know, they kept saying that it wasn't in his hand, it was in his head. And, you know, and they kept going, well, you know, there's nothing wrong with your hand. This is a psychosomatic problem. You'll have to go through years of therapy.
Well, that's what he told you. He'd been told that.
He told me, he said, the doctor said you should probably just learn to write with the other hand.
Right.
That's not a very optimistic view of the world. And it underestimates the power of human beings. Human beings are wanton learning machines. And every time, I have a career of 45 years, of pretty much only taking people who have been given up on by somebody or a group of people or a chain of people. Some of them have been in therapy for 20 years or have been hospitalized for years. And most of the time, I don't see them more than once or twice, because I don't bother to find out what's wrong with them. I don't really care how they got so stupid. I don't look at it as something that needs to be cured. We learn a lot of great things in our lifetime and a whole lot of stupid things. And the way you get smarter is you stop doing whatever instigates the stupid behavior. So if you have a big picture and every day you look at it and feel bad, you have to shrink it down so it don't make you feel bad and push it into the distance and put something else in its place, which gets you to behave the way you want to.
Yeah.
And it's really all about having freedom of choice.
We're hitting the break here. Dr. Richard Bandler is with us. He is the co-inventor of Neuro Linguistic Programming, also known as NLP. The workshop that we're at is from the website purenlp.com if you want to learn more about that. And Richard Bandler's books, of course, you can find everywhere. We'll be back with more of Dr. Bandler, and we'll also pick up your calls for him later on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Dr. Richard Bandler here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from Orlando. We'll be back.
And newthinkingpublications.com.
We'll talk about it on the. In fact, we're back on the air. Dr. Richard Bandler is with us, and I want to hold that question for a little bit. How much has NLP changed since you guys first kind of organized this system?
Phenomenally.
Okay.
Phenomenally. What I was able to do in the first 10 years, and most of it I don't even do anymore because I found better ways, that, the more we understand about successful thinking, the more we're careful about whose thinking we model. And the tools themselves have evolved phenomenally. That, we studied the best hypnotists in the world and learned about patterns. We studied people at advertising agencies. And even long after John went his own way and I went my own way, John developed things, and I'm not sure what they are, but I know I've learned 1,000% more since then, and think about things in a way that's easier to teach, easier to learn, and faster to do.
So if somebody wants to start out, somebody's watching this and they're going, NLP what? I never heard of this. I don't know what's going on. Where do they start? Is there a particular book that you recommend, or a video course?
I have the ultimate introduction to NLP is the name of one of the books. I have something called Richard Bandler's Guide to Transformation. That's a little more academic. There are videos, there are YouTube videos, there's zillions of things depending upon what you like doing. Yeah. And, I've been around for a long time. I've written 31 books. I've co-authored 31 books. And I don't recommend you start at my beginning. You don't need to go through all the trouble that I did to get where I am. Mm-hmm. That's not what progress is about. I recommend you start with the later books and work towards the earlier ones. And I find that my thinking got clearer the more I knew how to do what I did. And rather than going back and thinking about therapy, you should really think about it the way we do now. It's all really about problem solving in the end.
Do you, I know you are careful to disassociate yourself from, like earlier when you said, no, he wasn't sick, I didn't cure him, disassociate yourself from essentially the medical model, particularly the psychological medical model.
Well, the psychological model is still based on Freudian thinking, no matter how much they claim it isn't. They're still looking for things in a causal relationship. That of course, what causes all your problems is birth, right? We already know that. So we're going to go and undo it. It's not, or reliving experiences to get rid of the bad feelings. We've tried that for 50 years. It just doesn't really work. And even to get rid of the bad feelings, it doesn't tell you where to go. And, to me, it's all about the time and the quality of it and how you spend it. And, the first thing I ask people when they tell me about anything that's, quote, a difficulty, I go, well, how much time every day do you spend thinking about this or worrying about it? And then I start multiplying it. And, of course, in a year it adds up to 500, 1,000, 2,000 hours. And then you start going, well, 10 years, 20,000 hours, 30 years, and 30,000 hours. And you go, does this sound like a good plan? Because they don't understand. They're in the moment, so they're not thinking that this is planning. Yeah. But when most people say, I think I can't do it, they're actually saying, I remember I can't do it. There's a real difference between thinking and remembering.
We'll continue that conversation. We'll be right back with Dr. Richard Bandler.